We'll just have a look at the schedule for today. I mean, is that clear? Oh, yeah. This is it. Okay. In the evening, is this it? I mean, does at what time? Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, I just muted our microphone, sorry. Hi Pam, can you hear us?
Hi, I'm just the test person for Ron, who will be joining later.
Perfect, thank you. We're good to go.
Okay. So all is good?
All is good.
Thank you, Andrew.
Bye.
Oh, you want to sing?
Yeah, thinking it's probably about that time.
Oh, thank you. Upstairs. Upstairs? Yeah. Oh. Right.
So we're going to open today with a song, which is number 3 on your song sheet, called Swimming to the Other Side. And it's one that I performed at the banquet at the big conference, so you might sort of remember it. And just the chorus is printed there, so I'll sing the verses, but we start with the chorus. So, and it's a real easy tune, I think you'll find. Number 3. We are living beneath the great big dipper. We are washed by the very same rain. We are swimming in the street together, some in power and some in pain. We can worship this ground we walk on, cherishing the beings that we live beside. Loving spirits will live forever. We're all swimming to the other side. I am alone and I am searching, hungering for answers in my time. I am balanced at the brink of wisdom. I'm impatient to receive a sign. I move forward with my senses open. Imperfection can be my crime. In humility I will listen. We're all swimming to the other side. Okay, again. We are living in the great big dipper. We are washed by the very same rain. We are swimming in the stream together, some in power and some in pain. We can worship this ground we walk on, cherishing the beings that we live beside. Loving spirits will live forever. We're all swimming to the other side. On this journey through thoughts and feelings, finding intuition, my head, my heart, I am gathering the tools together. I'm preparing to do my part. All of those who've come before me band together to be my guide, loving lessons that I will follow. We're all swimming to the other side. Here we go. We are living in the big dipper. We are washed by the very same.
Going for quantity, not
We are
quality.
swimming in the stream together, some in power and some in pain. We can worship this ground we walk
Is that a good spot for you?
cherishing the beings that we live beside. The loving spirits will live forever. We're all swimming to the other side. When we get there, we'll discover all of the gifts we've been given to share have been with us since life's beginning, and we never noticed that they were there. We can balance at the brink of wisdom, never recognizing that we arrive. Loving spirits will live forever. We're all swimming to the other side. We are living in the great big river. We are washed by the very same rain. We are swimming in the stream together. Some in power and some in pain. We can worship this ground we walk on, cherishing the beings that we live beside. Loving spirits will live forever. We're all swimming to the other side. Loving spirits will live forever. We're all swimming to the other side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherry, and good morning, everyone. My name is Bonnie Tarwater. It's a great honor to be here with everyone. And we thought before we begin, we would have a moment of silent prayer and meditation. And we are going to light our candle. And as we reflect on the beauty and the wonder of creation, we have a moment to have silent gratitude. And I encourage you to close your eyes and imagine the earth and creation and the galaxies and the cosmos and all that is beautiful as we give thanks for this blessing to be together. We give thanks, blessed be, and amen.
Amen.
So welcome to this wonderful conference for our common home, and we had a wonderful day yesterday, and we're delighted to have Dr. David Griffin here as our morning speaker, and he needs no introduction. For those of us here at Claremont, he is a giant and a great spiritual and religious leader, and we thank him for his many gifts. He is a professor of philosophy of religion and theology, emeritus, at both Claremont School of Theology and Claremont Graduate University. He's, of course, the co-founder and the co-director with John Cobb of the Center for Process Studies. He has published an amazing amount of both books and articles, 34 books, and there's a new one out, I understand, that's coming out soon, primarily in theology, philosophy of religion, with special emphasis on the problem of evil and the relation between science and religion. He's edited a series of books on constructive postmodernism, under which label process thought has gained a large following in China. After retiring, he began his work on 9/11. He has written 11 books on 9/11, and I have to say that whenever I have read any of these books and seen him on video, I have thought that he is a giant. It is to have such a truth teller in our midst has been enormously inspiring for many of us. So welcome, David, and thank you.
Well, thank you, Bonnie. And it's particularly nice to be called giant after my illness where I lost 3 inches. I'm sorry I'll have to read to you this morning. One of the afflictions of my illness was aphasia. And so I sometimes can't talk too good. And okay, no more aphasia jokes. Okay. So, Pope Francis published his encyclical on the theme of care for our common home at about the same time as the 2015 Whitehead Conference centered around the idea of an ecological civilization. At the end of this conference, John Cobb suggested that process thinkers should do whatever we could to spread the influence of the Pope's vision. Towards that end, he edited a book around our common home. My own effort is a forthcoming book, Protecting Our Common Sacred Home, Pope Francis and Process Theology. This book argues that although these two positions come out of very different traditions, they are remarkably similar, so they may mutually support each other. The first part of the book is headed, Why We Have Been Led to Destroy Our Common Home. It has chapters on false God, false morality, and idolatry. The chapter on false God has two sections, one dealing with God as creator, the other discussing the power of God. On God as creator, both Pope Francis and Process Theology reject anthropocentrism, which, in the Pope's words, sees nature as an insensate order, as raw material to be hammered into useful shape. By contrast, he says, all creatures have an intrinsic value independent of their usefulness. Similarly, process theologian John Cobb rejects the idea that non-human nature has no value in itself, so that its value lies entirely in its usefulness to people who alone have intrinsic worth. Accordingly, both the Pope and process theology hold that much Christian thinking implies a false view of God. The idea of God as having created a cosmic machine in which nothing but intrinsic value exists except in human minds and perhaps angels. That view gives us one view of the universe's creator. A universe in which all creatures have intrinsic value implies a very different view of our creator. A creator who enters into loving relations with all creatures, rather than controlling them from without. Closely related, Pope Francis holds a view of divine power closer to that of process theology than to that of traditional theism. The picture of God as the creator of a world machine fits with the traditional doctrine of divine omnipotence, according to which God can completely control all events in the world. St. Augustine, for example, said that God is called Almighty for no other reason than he can do whatever he willeth, and his omnipotent will is never impeded by the will of any creature. As a result, the will of the omnipotent is always undefeated. This idea of God has led many Christians to deny climate science, which says that the burning of fossil fuel threatens the continuation of civilization. For example, Republican Senator James Inhofe of Oklahoma wrote a book that calls global warming a hoax, saying, God is still up there. Inhofe said that it is arrogant to think that we human beings would be able to change what he is doing in the climate. The pervasiveness of this view in America has led this country to be extremely complacent about climate change. Polls have shown, as stated in a Washington Post article of 2013, Americans are less worried about climate change than almost anyone else. This complacency has been encouraged by people such as Rush Limbaugh, who said, if you believe in God, then intellectually you cannot believe in man-made global warming. The position of Pope Francis could not be more different. Destroying the environment, he said, would be a grave sin against God, the Creator. It might be assumed, to be sure, that the Pope accepted the traditional view of divine omnipotence, given his reference to God as the all-powerful creator. However, the Pope's writing shows that he is anything but complacent. In his address to the United Nations, he said, "The ecological crisis and the large-scale destruction of biodiversity can threaten the very existence of the human species." How then are we to interpret the Pope's reference to God as the all-powerful creator? A clue is provided by his statement that the universe did not emerge as a result of arbitrary omnipotence. Rather, creation is of the order of love. God's love is the fundamental moving force in all things. That is the position of process theology. God could be called all-powerful, say process theologians, but not in the sense that God has essentially all the power, so that all creaturely power can be overridden. Whitehead rejected the idea of one supreme reality, omnipotent, disposing a wholly derivative world. He held instead that the divine element in the world is to be conceived as a persuasive agency and not as a coercive agency. Rather than being all-powerful in a coercive way, process theologians hold, God is all-powerful in the sense of being the supreme power in reality, having the unique power to bring forth a universe. From this perspective, God's being all-powerful does not entail that God could unilaterally prevent global warming from destroying civilization. Another reason why modernity has been led to destroy our home is that it has a false morality, based either on the false idea of God or on the rejection of a divine creator altogether. The rejection of a divine creator leads, says the Pope, to complete relativism, according to which there are no indisputable truths to guide our lives. A relativism that has led to the deterioration of the natural environment as well as the social environment. Whitehead likewise rejected the idea that there are no indisputable truths to guide our lives. Rather, he said, we must bow to those presumptions which, in despite of criticism, we still employ for the regulation of our lives. One of those presumptions is the existence of moral norms. Agreeing with the Pope's view that morality is derived from God, Whitehead wrote, there are experiences of ideals entertained, of ideals defaced, ideals aimed at, and ideals achieved. This is the experience of the deity of the universe. In addition to modernity's theoretical relativism, said Pope Francis, the rejection of the reality of God has also led to a practical relativism derived from anthropocentrism. When people accept the anthropocentric view of reality, they tend to give absolute priority to immediate convenience, and all else becomes relative. This theoretical and practical relativism has led to ethical and cultural decline, which has produced people with no concern for the environment and the rights of future generations. This lack of concern is a symptom of the fact that today's culture has lost sight of the great motivations which make it possible for us to make sacrifices. Losing sight of these great motivations, Whitehead held, is an effect of the loss of a religious vision of reality. The vigor of civilized societies, he wrote, is preserved by the widespread sense that high aims are worthwhile, a sense that is created by the intuition of the sacred, which is at the foundation of all religion. The failure to be concerned about future generations is closely related to the decline of concern for the common good. Our inability to think seriously about future generations, said the Pope, is linked to our inability to broaden the scope of our present interests, to include an interest in the common good. Loss of interest in the common good has followed from the increasing secularity of society. When the sense of the sacred is blocked out, a genuine sense of the common good also disappears. The common good has been central to process theologians, especially in Herman Daly and John Cobb's book, For the Common Good, and in Cobb's little book, Sustaining the Common Good. Like the Pope, Cobb has spoken of the urgent need to revivify belief in the importance of caring for something beyond the interests of oneself and the groups with which one identifies. A third reason why our world has been led to destroy our common home is idolatry. The worship of the true God has been displaced by the worship of an idol, money. An economic model based on the God of money, said the Pope, not only needs to sacrifice human lives on the altar of money and profit, it also needs to plunder nature to sustain the frenetic rhythm of consumption that is inherent in it. Expressing the threat of this idolatry to both nature and poor, Pope Francis said, "The thirst for power and possessions knows no limits. In this system, which tends to devour everything which stands in the way of increased profits, whatever is fragile, like the environment, is defenseless before the interests of a deified market, which becomes the only rule." Central to this idolatry is the continued use of fossil fuels, which result in extraordinary climate change and an unprecedented destruction of ecosystems. Using a memorable metaphor for the greed that is destroying both human lives and the environment, Pope said, "Behind all this pain and death and destruction, there is the stench of what Basil of Caesarea called the dung of the devil. An unfettered pursuit of human rules, that is the dung of the devil. Because of this dung," Pope Francis added, "our common home is being pillaged, laid waste. Cowardice in defending it is a grave sin." The Pope's critique of idolatry echoes that of process thinkers. Cobb and Daly have been criticizing growth idolatry since their 1977 book, For the Common Good. Speaking of the primary example of idolatry today, Cobb used the term economism, defined as the belief that that primary devotion should be directed to the expansion of the economy. Just as Pope Francis said that the global economy is now based on the idolatry of money, Cobb said that the dominant religion now is economism. Focusing on the destructive idea of the endless economic growth, Daly's thinking here was originally developed in response to the famous 1972 book, Limits to Growth, which pointed out that quantitative biophysical growth cannot continue forever because the planet is finite. Although this should be obvious, the idolatry of the economics world showed that they're they're infected by this idolatry. One Yale economist called the book irresponsible nonsense. Another Yale economist said that the book would send humanity back to the living standards of the Dark Ages. Still another economist said that the book was such a brazen, impudent piece of nonsense that nobody could possibly take it seriously.
And there you have it.
Describing this, Describing this attitude as growth mania, daily characterized thus. Economic growth is held to be the cure for poverty, unemployment, debt repayment, inflation, balance of payment deficits, pollution, depletion, the population explosion, crime, divorce, and drug addiction. In short, economic growth is both the panacea and the summum bonum. This is growth mania. When we add to GNP the cost of defending ourselves against the unwanted consequences of growth, and happily count that as further growth, we then have hyper growth mania. When we deplete geological capital and ecological life support systems and count that depletion as net current income, we arrive at our present state of terminal hyper growth mania. Pope Francis shared this critique of growth mania, criticizing the idea of infinite or unlimited growth, which is based on the lie that there is an infinite supply of Earth's goods. The second part of my book deals with reconstruction to save our sacred home, with chapters titled Nature is Sacred, Evolution is Sacred, Evil and Sacredness, and Life-Protecting World Order. Excuse me one moment. Chapter 4 argues that we need to recover the idea of nature as sacred. Otherwise, Pope Francis suggested, human beings will not become sufficiently motivated to save the earth. This common home of all men and women, he said in his address to the United Nations, must be built on the understanding of a certain sacredness of created nature. Process theology has such a view, which is different from standard views of the God-world relation. Traditional Christian thought rejects as pagan the idea that nature is sacred, insisting that God alone is sacred. Atheism says that nature is not sacred because nothing is. Pantheism regards nature as sacred, but only by losing any basis for distinguishing between what is and what ought to be. By contrast, process theology holds a pantheistic view of reality, according to which the universe, understood as the totality of finite things, exists in God. What is sacred then is God with the world. Pope Francis is clearly closer to this view than any of the others. Besides suggesting that God is in all things, the Pope said that the universe unfolds in God, in the Creator who lives among us and surrounds us. Chapter 5 argues that we should also regard the evolutionary process as sacred. Although Pope Francis has not written much about this, he has said evolution in nature is not inconsistent with the notion of creation. In response to those who claim that the universe was created all at once, Pope said, when we read about creation in Genesis, we should avoid imagining God as a magician with a magic wand able to do everything. Process theologians have, of course, written a great amount about evolution, showing that it is a sacred process in the sense of being divinely inspired and guided. In recent decades, the sense of our universe as a divine creation has been strengthened by the realization that our universe has been finely tuned to make it suitable for life. Whitehead would not have been surprised. He endorsed the books by Harvard biochemist Lawrence Joseph Henderson, who described the universe as biocentric. Chapter 6 explains why the existence of evil in the world does not contradict the view of nature as sacred. The problem of evil has led many people to an atheistic, nihilistic view of reality, according to which nothing is sacred or holy. Process theology shows why the existence of evil, even horrible evil, does not contradict the goodness of the Creator and its world, and the Creator's world, as I have explained ad nauseum. Process theology thereby supports the Pope's hope for the awakening of a new reverence for life and the joyful celebration of life. The book's final chapter discusses the need for a life-protecting world order. Although many people agree with Pope Francis and process theologians that it is life, not the economy, that is sacred, this conviction will remain largely ineffective unless there is a life-protecting world order, in which protection of life will be fundamental to the practices of individuals, communities, businesses, economies, technologies, and governments at every level. Speaking like process theologians, Pope Francis said, "It cannot be emphasized enough how everything is interconnected." Moreover, interdependence obliges us to think of one world with a common plan. A common plan is necessary because the problems cannot be resolved by unilateral actions on the part of individual countries. In addition to having a plan to reduce fossil fuels without delay, we need planning for a sustainable and diversified agriculture, a better management of marine and forest sources, and ensuring universal access to drinking water. More generally, the world needs an agreement on systems of governance for the whole range of so-called global commons. To develop a common plan, as Pope pointed out, we need international institutions. Process thinkers agree with the Pope's call for a global political framework that can protect our common sacred home from the incessant drive to maximize corporate profits, regardless of their damage to our climate and hence to human beings, present and future. Only some type of global government would have the power to prevent the idolatry of money from turning our planet into a hell. My hope with this essay is to show that process theology and the Pope's encyclical can support each other. Process theology's view of God and the world is fully compatible with the thought of today's leading Catholic theologian. And the Pope's theology of nature is in line with a type of philosophical theology that integrates today's best thinking in economics, physics, biology, and ecology. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David, and we open it up for any of your comments or questions. Yes.
I believe that the breakneck pursuit of economic growth is itself rooted in an anarchic system of states that are competing with each other for domination in a world order, described aptly in an updated book written by Henry Kissinger last year called World Order. So I would like to ask if you can comment on how we can engage with realpolitik in our international system in such a way that the Pope's vision for a life-protecting order can emerge out of what appears to be the ashes of a current obsession with domination and competition among autonomous states.
This will sound like a planted question. However, a decade before the decade I spent working on 9/11, I had spent working on the question of global anarchy and the need for global government. And so I used to teach graduate classes here. It was called what? Theology, ecology, and something. And
Global Democracy Society.
you know, our dean at the time, Joe Hoff, he just always called it Griffin's course on world government. But yeah, I spent an enormous amount of time on that. Really 10 years working largely on that problem. But then I came to the view, I think it was actually in this room where I first spoke about this, or downstairs, that 9/11 was an inside job. And I thought, you know, we could show that, as it's so obvious. If you learn anything about structural engineering or physics or chemistry, it had to be an inside job. It couldn't have been airplanes hitting the... So I thought, well, I'll just take a year, I'll just take a little time off and solve 9/11. Well, here we are almost 10 years later.
15.
And, well, no, since I started working, yeah. Yeah, I wrote my first book, I published my first book in 2004.
Right.
And so one thing would happen after another. I'd write a book, and then they do something else. You know, these terms coming back to me. But you know, so then I'd have to respond to it and show that's. And then they would write something else, and I'd have to write something else. And
Popular Mechanics article.
and Popular Mechanics wrote a whole, you know, everybody said, oh, Popular Mechanics, they did it because we trust those guys. Well, they fired the whole staff and replaced it with another staff to do this. But most people didn't know that. We told, but they wouldn't listen, you know, because we were conspiracy theorists. So they don't have to listen to us. So yeah, so I agree with you completely that I'm sorry my wife is here to hear me say this, but I'm thinking of, if time permits, that I go back and try to rework that, update that book. So thank you very much. I mean, that is the problem, and that's what the Pope is implying here. The individual states. Some people think, well, you know, we don't need a global government. We've got the United States. It's de facto a global government. Yeah, de facto, that is the problem. Yeah. The problem is we've not worked out committed ourselves to the general good of the planet. We've considered ourselves devoted to ourselves, or mainly our business world. Yeah. Vern, yeah.
On the way to the state of things as you see they ought to be, what's the role of the university, and what is your understanding of what needs to happen in the university for this to be facilitated? So what's your vision for the reform of the university?
That's another book that I never got to. It's, as you know, I mean, it's extremely complex, so nothing I could say here, but I was going to start with just, journalism, and try to get journalists to be telling the truth, not just repeating what the president says, and then go down. I mean, that all to try to get the university really to be concerned with the universe and not, but I mean, it's purely, it's not entirely parochial, but on all the issues that really mattered, it's all America-centered, and what will strengthen our case in the world economically and politically. Yeah, so I'm sorry I can't really say anything worthwhile about it, but we'll see if I find time to write that book. But that'll come right after the. Yeah. You got to get in line here.
I was just going to comment that I think that what we're in now is much beyond the United States of preoccupation. We're running into a transition to a world economy, but what's happening at this point is currency wars. The currency wars are often standing in place of other kinds of wars. And again, however, the value system remains the same, but it's not just in the United States anymore.
Oh, no, we've been very good missionaries. So, we starting, most forcibly in 2001, we were going to become the global, the control of the whole planet.
Not going to happen.
And, pardon?
Not going to happen.
No, but we tried. I mean, so I really shouldn't say this, but my my next book is on after these other two. It's called Bush and Cheney, How They Ruined America and the World. Yeah, but let's just take the case of the economy. Why did we take out Gaddafi?
Yeah.
He had an economic plan that we didn't like. I mean, and so Hillary said, let's take him out.
Okay, but
And
meanwhile, how are we going to take out Putin? Are we going to take out?
a lot of them would like to. The neocons.
But the thing is that it's a currency war now with many.
Oh yeah.
Many centers of power and some efforts to make with like Christine Lagarde to make it a much more world centered economic system. But they are actually in conflict, I think, with many of the nationalist plans that are causing the currency wars.
Yeah, I mean, that's the neocons, they're ready to go to war with China and Soviet Union, or what used to be the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And so they're willing to bring the world down to, make the case that they won, it's a battle. I mean, but in South America, trying to break free. John can talk much more about this than I can, but so we keep trying to knock those plans out, and so far we've done a pretty good job, but pretty much much of the world is trying to gang up and saying we're not going to do your bidding anymore.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's a very obviously tenuous time. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, right at the very beginning of your speech, you said that that we've changed our idea of God, and now we worship the market and money. And I wondered, I mean, just because you used that verb, you have changed it, implying that there was something different at another point. And I wondered, did you really mean that? And if so, what did it used to be, and when did it change many hundreds of years ago?
Well, John wrote a little book a few years ago. This is on the World Bank.
Half of it was on the World Bank, and
Yeah.
half of it was on Christianism, nationalism.
That's
and
right.
economism.
So John went through, in a very big stroke, the history of the modern world and from the Middle Ages. So he referred to that as the period of Christianism. And then that was replaced by the age of nationalism. And then he dates the rise of this new world, the economic world order, economism, about 1950. So maybe, John, you would like to talk about this a little bit.
Let me just say, I mean, obviously, money has always been important, and Jesus regarded it as the great enemy, and so forth, no question. But nevertheless, in his day, I think that the Roman Empire controlled the money. So I didn't go back to that period, but so it's not that money has suddenly become important when it hadn't been before. But in the Middle Ages, the financial interest really still was under the control of political and churchly organizations. The church actually set prices, for example. See, that's a different structure of things. And then when you use dates, obviously it's just a symbol of a change. But there were the wars in the Middle Ages were crusades and wars between groups, of course political and of course economic, but nevertheless religious. 30 years of struggle in Germany were the religious wars. And they concluded by saying, we'll let the governments decide what the religion will be. Okay, that's at least a symbol of a transition to nationalism.
At least in what you call it.
Well,
I mean, just because it's religion didn't mean it was good.
No, I never said any of this was good. If you think I am saying this is good and this is bad, I'm trying to describe what's happened.
Okay.
And today I think I have a little difference from David in that I think the US government is in the service of the financial order. And Wall Street and London tell the US government what to do for the most part. So they use our army not for the sake of building up American benefits for the United States. This is not a drastic difference, but I think we have that you call, you think of American empire as being sought for the sake of the people of the United States. I don't think you do.
Oh, no, of course.
No, okay. But I think that the shots are called from the financial sector rather than from through government. So government is used for a purpose beyond itself.
These neocons, they really are interested in American and Israeli power. And so it's not just, they're not just interested in the global economy and that. They are somewhat pretty strongly nationalistic in that respect.
But the example you gave of Libya, you see, it was an economic threat. Rather than Gaddafi, it wasn't a threat to U.S. sovereignty or anything of that kind.
No, but it was a threat to what American power, American money has meant in the global economy, and there have been these plans to replace that.
I just think that it's not just American money we're protecting, it's just as much British money and Swiss money.
Well, and French, when when Sarkozy was convinced to go, I mean, and the interesting thing is that these memos, these emails that went the wrong direction in a sense, and then I don't know if you've seen it, but since yesterday, they said they're not going to release any more of those because it's coming up that all of this Libya thing was being, channeled through the private lines rather than through. And so, well, that had nothing to do with national security. Of course not. They didn't care if they knew that what they were trying to do to Gaddafi at the time. But Sarkozy. So I think that they were not just interested in American. The euro was also being threatened. And that's and specifically France, and so that's why Sarkozy agreed to participate in the toppling of Gaddafi. Yeah.
Other questions? Yes.
This thing about the Christian, I felt that you were happy that the Pope and process theology kind of were going along the same stream. But isn't Wall Street, aren't all these people Christian? I mean, it's like Hillary Clinton, people don't believe. I mean, she's gonna do this and she's gonna do that. But look at the connections. I mean, and I mean that this is all tied in with Christianity. They don't have a very good record, how the Christians went with
No, I mean, this is a big, very important topic, that the distinction between a Christian, you might say a real Christian, and a self-identified Christian. So we're talking about self-identified Christians here. And this issue has come up. I happen to be writing a chapter now on Islamophobia. And so, people on our side, the West, say that, those Muslims, they're terrorists. It's a terrorist religion. It's a religion that, look at 9/11, those guys. And, if you know anything about the so-called hijackers, let's go for the sake of argument, say that they really were Muslims. They weren't, but let's say they were. If they were not good Muslims.
Right.
They were drinking and prostituting and, everything. But nevertheless, we say we've got to, now going on in the election here, keep Muslims out of the country because that's a violent religion. Look at 9/11. But you come to the slaughter in Norway. What was it? 2 years ago, Breivik? Something like that. He killed, 70-some people? And so we immediately assumed he was by we, I mean American press, assumed they were Muslims. Well, it turns out he's a right-wing Christian. And so there was a lot of discussion in the paper. Well, so were they Christian terrorists? Oh, no, because they weren't really Christian. They really, they don't really believe the creeds or any of that. So we've got this complete double standard. We say that our people who call themselves are Christians and not Christians unless they really act like Christians. But Muslims, if they're just self-identified Muslims, then we use them to villainize the whole 1.4 billion people or whatever it is.
And who touts Christianity, to me, more than your enemy? The neocons. And I just want to say this, I don't know if it has anything to do with this, but, I was a member of the Unitarian Church for so long, and they are to me, they really epitomize some of the most important Christian values, of true spirituality. So,
Yeah, Whitehead identified with Unitarians. He didn't publicly do it, but that's where his heart was. I'm sorry, I lost the train of thought where you were going there. I had a really good answer and I can't.
You can write a book about it.
Yeah.
You must remember that Whitehead's brother was a bishop of the Church of England.
Oh, sure, yeah. Oh, I know what I was going to say is that, if we're going to use that kind of thing, we could call 9/11 Christian terrorism, and in fact, Methodist terrorism. Cheney is a Methodist. Yeah, so self-identified Methodist.
The Clintons also.
Pardon?
We can claim the Clintons also self-identified Methodists.
Yeah, well, you guys are really responsible.
Watch out for us Methodists.
Hey, Bill McKibben is a Methodist.
What?
Bill McKibben is a Methodist.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
there are good, like
Thank you.
any religion or any devotion, there
That's
are
right.
good ones and bad ones.
That's right.
The only question is whether the good ones outnumber the others. Yeah. Well, we're back.
Yes,
Hi, Martin.
just another quick question.
Oh,
I listen to NPR all the time, of course, all things considered and all that. And then Marketplace is on in there, and I usually just leave it on and listen, But I often want to write to them and say, like, does it not ever occur to you that what you're talking about is only indicative of human and planetary suicide? This idea of the terminal hyper growth. Is there, even just to, what would be a way to start with the conversation with those people obviously there are ways that we've already begun in a sense, but it doesn't seem to trickle up anywhere but the choir who's already singing the song.
well, if any of them are self-identified Roman Catholics, we could send the Pope to talk to them. But that's precisely what his encyclical is about, is the fact we've lost this sense of the common good. And we only, what's amazing is, with regard to climate change, is these, the Koch brothers. One of them, David, I believe, has a fairly young child. And the world is going to be a horrible world if things continue the way they are. He doesn't seem to care. Or, they think because they're so rich, they can insulate themselves. They can somewhat, more than most of us, and certainly more than poor people can. But when the temperature goes up another 5 degrees, they're not going to be able to. So it does seem to be this self-centeredness where we really do not. It used to be we really cared about our children, our grandchildren, and descendants down the line. Now, you never know how strong that was and what sacrifices they would take. But from my reading, it was considerable. And now it seems very minimal. Obviously there are some really good parents and stuff, but in terms of the way the economy and the way the culture is going, that doesn't seem to be based on any concern for future generations.
And I think it's also based on just a spell we're under about we don't even know what a good life is anymore.
Yeah, and also this propaganda. It's good that the press finally came around, because of. But I don't know how much has got into the general press the fact that the mobile
Exxon.
Oh, Exxon. You know, how about they were lying all these years? They were putting millions of dollars into denying, and now the documents have shown, actually stories in press from those days, they were very strong. I mean, they said, this is very serious. We've got to change our business practices, or ExxonMobil won't be able to continue indefinitely. So those guys were concerned, but then they were trumped by the, no pun intended, trumped by the people in the financial side of things. And they said, no, that's not the way we're going, and we're gonna deny. And so how much has that reached into the general press, the fact that they now know? I mean, there's no doubt about it. Nobody can deny it anymore.
People who read small articles on page 12 will know all about it.
Yeah. So, you know, in my world, everybody knows that, but this is a very narrow little world. You know, the world where people think. Yeah. I think we're out of time.
I think on that,
Yeah.
on that last note.
All right.
Thank you so much, David Griffin. And we are going to be having a Skype online session next with Mary Evelyn Tucker. So we just have a minute and a half until she comes online. There she is. Oh, wonderful. Oh, great. Hi. Hi, Mary Evelyn.
Hi there.
How are you?
Very good. I hope you're all well. It's great to be 3,000 miles connected to you away.
Yes.
You're going to say you're good to be 3,000 miles away from us.
If you sit over here. No. Connected.
Yeah. Well, it's wonderful, and we thank you for your contribution to the carbon footprint and not joining us. We would rather have you in person, but we appreciate very much your being with us. And Mary Evelyn Tucker is a wonderful woman. She was here at the Seizing an Alternative Conference, obviously, and is a contributor to our book as a response to the Pope's encyclical. She is a senior lecturer and research scholar at Yale University. Is that where you're right now geographically, at Yale?
Yes, at home, but at Yale, yes.
Okay, wonderful, okay. She teaches there in a joint master's degree program between the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies and the Divinity School. Concern for the environmental crisis led her to organize with her husband, John Grimm, a series of 10 conferences on world religions and ecology at the Center for the Study of World Religions at Harvard in 1995 to 98. At a culminating conference at the United Nations in 1998, she and Grimm founded the Forum on Religion and Ecology, now based at Yale. The most recent of her many books is Ecology and Religion. We welcome you and are delighted to have you with us.
Thank you so much. And first, let me say, David, that was just a terrific talk, and I appreciated it enormously, and the discussion as well. And I hope we'll be able to see a copy of your talk at some point. But thank you, and thanks to all my friends out there, John Cobb and Phil and John Quiring and Andrew and everybody. So I'm presuming, is Joseph Prabhu there and also going to do a response here?
Yes.
Yes, he is.
Okay, great. So how long would you like me to talk, and so we maximize the hour here?
Our format is we ask you to talk about 5 minutes for your on your chapter, and then we will all have an opportunity to ask questions and dialogue with you, and then Joseph will be responding. That's my understanding.
Okay. If you don't mind, I think I'm going to talk a little more than 5 minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. She has 30 minutes. I'm so sorry. 30 minutes.
5 minutes.
30 minutes total, and we're asking people 5 minutes, whatever you like, Mary Ellen. We want to be engaged with you and Joseph for this 30 minutes.
You can speak for 20 minutes, leave 10 minutes for questions, answers.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. So the point is my essay's only like a couple pages there, and I have a much longer essay, which I'm happy to share with you, that I've done for the Quarterly Review of Biology, which is obviously a science-based journal, and Peter Raven is the lead scientist in that issue. Now, whoops, are we going forward with these? Yeah, so, okay, let me just start, and I'll go through these slides briefly. So we're at this point clearly where we're between climate awareness and action, and the point is, how are we going to leverage this up? So we can I change them, Andrew, or you will do that?
I'll change them for you.
Okay, next slide then. So if we're leveraging moral transformation, we clearly have tremendous possibility in secular environmental ethics. Aldo Leopold, a graduate of our school, and I think we've got to really give a large shout out to secular environmental ethics that it's been working in this area for so long. We also have, as we know clearly, the efforts of the world's religions, late as they have been, but especially in bringing together this ecology and justice. And I should put on this slide a very singular line for process thought, process philosophy, and process theology, which has been an incredible contribution to this work. And then the papal encyclical is really this call for ecological conversion, which I want to underscore here for the long term. So next slide. So we know the problems and promise of religion, these large numbers of people, but it has moral and institutional power. And what I want to suggest that may give us some hope is the scaling up has been over the last 20 years, that we have now a field emerging of religion and ecology, of values, cultural values, as being part of environmental studies discussions. And we have this force in the larger society. And that's where the traction of the encyclical, I think, can move forward. Next slide. So we've done, of course, this series of books on world religions and ecology, and we're about to celebrate the 20th anniversary of this series of conferences and so on this fall at Harvard in October. Next. And we have the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology, which, you know, I think John Cobb understands so well how difficult it is to work within academia. And this is not an easy let's say, dance between a very science-based school and a divinity school, educating for ministry and so on, and a religious studies department. But I think we're beginning to have some ground and some traction with our colleagues there. And especially, I want to underscore, because of the encyclical. People are talking to us at Yale, have never talked to us before because of the encyclical. So, next slide. And the education world is opening up to this. Now, clearly the Catholic educational world, the Jesuits schools, every Jesuit college and university, 28 of them in the US, have had conferences on the encyclical, are trying to figure out how to integrate this into their environmental studies program. Again, I would say they're late, but they're coming on board. This online textbook that Loyola in Chicago has done, it's an open source textbook on all these major issues of the environment, but with the values integrated. And they have become leaders in this area. Loyola Marymount with Nancy Tuckman, a scientist, leading the way there. Next. So we have the People's Climate March, which was also a watershed of 10,000 religious leaders coming into New York to be part of that. It was never more visible that the religious leaders were part of this very widespread group of political, environmental, social justice activists. And Todd Stern, our lead negotiator for the State Department for COP, said to us when he came to Yale a week later, he said, everyone at the UN was watching this climate march. And he said, send us more religious leaders and spokespeople, because we want this moral part of the argument to be on the table with us. Next. So we are growing a movement slowly but surely with all of these groups: Green Faith, Faith in Place, Earth Ministry, Catholic Climate Covenant. These NGO kinds of groups are having traction. Again, they need more funding, they need leadership, they need next generation and so on. But there is a movement out there, force. Interfaith Power and Light is in over 40 states and has had traction. Next. So here we have the encyclical that then came into a field emerging still in academia and a force in the larger society. Next. So I want to just underscore, and Joseph has done this so well in his article, and I had really worked on this talk before. I have to confess I had read Joseph's whole article, but I just want to underscore the last two popes, despite whatever lacks there might have been. So John Paul II drew on Rerum Novarum, Pope Leo's encyclical on labor, on the conditions of the working poor and so on. And 100 years later, with his encyclical Centissimus Annus, again drew labor forward, although he said labor is something that is using nature. You could even say the wise use of nature and so on. But so he drew that forward in a position that we would still describe as dominion. But he had one of the first calls for global conversion. So I just wanted to underscore that. And next was Benedict, who he really underscored the duty to the poor in Caritas and Veritate in 2009. And he moved the conversation from dominion to stewardship and wise use. But he did underscore, as does Francis, this grammar of nature, this patterning of nature, this beauty and complexity that calls us to awe and reverence the sacredness that David was citing in his talk. And he calls us explicitly to intergenerational justice. So these two popes, in a way, prepared for the encyclical, which I think moves us light years ahead. As well, the Patriarch Bartholomew, often called the Green Patriarch, as you know, has been heavily drawn upon and a deep partner in this. We went on 7 of his symposium on water issues in Europe and in Greenland and in the Amazon. But he, as you know, in 1997, in Santa Barbara, called what we are doing ecological sin and crimes against creation. And his theological reflections on this, largely coming from, next slide, from his theologian, John Zazoulis, or John of Pergamon, who spent years in meditation, in thinking, in theological reflection of the Orthodox perspective of Earth as icon, as a luminous, generative, fecund, sacramental universe. And that goes directly into the encyclical in so many ways. The other big influence is Cardinal Turkson, as we know, the head of the Council of Justice and Peace, who was leading the whole drafting process and bringing clearly a perspective from the developing world. Next, Schellnhuber, the head of the Potsdam Institute for the Climate Impact Research, which has been going since 1992, 25 years. He has also been calling on the Nobel laureates in science and other fields for I don't know if it's bi-yearly, but for symposiums on global sustainability. It's quite remarkable. And my point here is, who was at the Vatican on June 18th when this came out? It was Schellnhuber, a leading scientist, it was Cardinal Turkson, and it was John Zazoulis, the Eastern Orthodox theologian. The Pope wasn't there. So symbolically, there's a huge ecumenical move here. There's a huge interdisciplinary move especially with the science community. And clearly underneath all of this is Leonardo Boff, the great theologian, liberation theologian from Brazil, who the liberation theology, again, as Joseph says in his article, undergirds this encyclical as no other encyclical prior to it. And his book, Cry of the Earth, Cry of the poor has been in this series at Orbis that we've been working on for about 20 years. He's an advisor to it, as is Sean McDonough, who had a great deal to do with the encyclical. I think Rosemary Ruther might be there. Her book on women is in this series. John Cobb has a book in the series and so on. But Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor is clearly the base note of the encyclical. And this bringing together of ecology and justice, I think, is one of the singular contributions of the encyclical. Next. So we have this worldview shift with integral ecology, with people and the planet, underscored by a new economics. We have the ethical challenges of both environmental degradation and eco-justice. And just to pause here and reflect on what we all know, but I really want to underscore, because I've been in the science-based school for 10 years here. I've been in secular academia my whole life. And the environmental studies programs and research programs are science, a little bit of policy, now more economics, technology, and law. But science has driven the action, and scientists have not understood the human dimension of the environment. This encyclical is bringing that conversation together, the people and planet. And I would also have actually a singular but gentle critique of people on the religious side, especially in the social justice movements, of which I began my own life in civil rights and anti-Vietnam War. But many in the Christian communities have been devoted to the cry of the poor, have not understood the cry of the earth. And I have had people say that publicly. That was just whitewater rafting or wilderness concerns. The environment was not our concern. This is an absolute watershed, joining together the tremendous power of ecological research and understanding of the complexity of ecosystems, of oceans, of watersheds, and so on, but with the human dimension and with the moral dimension, which needs to be spelled out. Again, I love David's reference through Whitehead of this incipient sense of the sacred that even Thomas Berry's, one of his last books, The Sacred Universe, I was astounded when Columbia Press said, let's use that for the title. How we re-inhabit this space of science and the human, of ecology and ethics, with a deepening sense that this is a sacred and unfolding universe, I think is our basic challenge. Next. So the audience is clearly immense, 2 billion Christians. It's extraordinary, again, unprecedented. Other religious communities we know are responding right and left. Next. So the goals of the encyclical, the short-term goal was actually realized to affect the UN climate talks in Paris in December. Our colleagues who were very much involved with it came back and said, everyone should be reading the encyclical. This is amazing. One guy who in the summer was like, well, the Pope isn't interested in cap and trade. He's now a big champion for the encyclical. And many people are saying that moral dimension did affect the Paris talks. But the Pope's longer term agenda, this ecological conversion over time, is, I think, what we can all embrace, even though it's a marathon, it's discouraging at points, but that is the longer term goal, I think, of the encyclical. It doesn't have to be everyone. It certainly isn't going to be some of our politicians. But let's go to the inspiration of this encyclical with Francis of Assisi, which I think we need to draw this back into the pulsation, the spiritual dimensions of this, which again, Joseph did beautifully, saying this is a spiritual document as well as scientific and political. So next slide. On the influence of Francis, unprecedented to call the earth Mother Earth. This would have bordered on paganism before and so on, but by drawing on the canticle to Brother Sun and Sister Moon, the Pope was singularly intelligent in the deepest senses of that word to say this is a fecund universe. Again, the work that Rosemary Ruther and other ecofeminists have done in this is so important. But I'm suggesting here that kind of awe does evoke action, reverence evokes responsibility, and kinship evokes a universal solidarity. All of that is the pulsating note, if you will, of the encyclical. Next slide. Now, obviously, the Pope does quote Teilhard, and this is something that, again, Joseph and I would agree on. The cosmological dimension is not as heightened as some of us might like, but it is there. And he cites Panikkar, I cite Teilhard, and I would also cite, obviously, Thomas Berry, who was working on these issues for as long as John Cobb from 1972. Is it too late? And finally, of course, this is next slide. This is the contribution of Journey of the Universe, which we're taking to Iran this month to show at a conference on religion and ecology. We're taking it to Seoul in the summer to show at the Science Museum. The Iranians are putting Farsi subtitles in it. The Koreans have Korean subtitles, and thanks to our dear friend Dr. Wang, we've been able to take it around China, and it's now in Chinese and so on. This sense, and I'll end with this wonderful quote from Albert Einstein, next slide, that a human being is part of a whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He or she experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. Next. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Next. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. I think this is the spirit of the encyclical. It's certainly the spirit of process thought, of Panikkar and Teilhard, of Thomas Berry, and many others that is now coming into play as we might not have expected in our own lifetime. And we can build on this for the next decades of our own life. And I'm so happy to be in touch with you at Claremont that have been taking the leadership on this for so long. Thank you very much.
Up, and Joseph is a contributor to this book, and he's a professor of philosophy and religion at California State University, Los Angeles. He's a writer, an editor, especially interested in Raman Panikkar. He has been a senior fellow of the Center of Study of World Religions at Harvard and at the Martin Marty Center at Chicago. President of the International Society for Asian and Comparative Philosophy, program chair for the Melbourne Parliament of World's Religion, and he won the Outstanding Professor Award in 2004 and a Lifetime Achievement Award, and he is also the co-chair of the track at the Seizing an Alternative Conference on Revisioning the Religions. So welcome, Joseph, and we invite you to respond to Mary Evelyn Tucker.
Thank you, Bonnie, and thank you, Mary Evelyn. That was just marvelous on many fronts. And we really miss having you here because, of course, in spite of the marvels of technology, there's nothing that replaces person-to-person interaction, as you well know, the I-thou relationship. But this was a very encouraging talk for me, because you've given us a sense of the movement, and I want to stress that obviously while ecological conversion is a long-term goal, it is heartening that a movement is building up at various levels, even though our universities don't quite seem to have heard the message as yet. And that's something, of course, that we have to do, you at Yale and we here at Claremont and in Los Angeles have to do something about, given that many of us are indeed university people. It's a scandal that this sense that seems to have affected the population for reasons that we can discuss seem to have escaped the university, whether it's the compartmentalization, the idea that somehow these problems, it's a very structural problem that we can try to spend some time on, rooted in the modern university, this idea of specialization which, again, to cite Wordsworth, we murder to dissect. And we've, in a sense, missed the holistic nature of these problems, which the Pope's idea of integral ecology, I think, wants to highlight. So I just want to register first that we at the university level have a challenge before us to sort of break with this. I want to make a distinction between science and scientism. I mean, science is certainly something that I think is a very valuable. It's not by any means, and that's a part of scientism, it's not by any means the only, or even from my point of view, the privileged form of knowledge. It's because there are humanistic and artistic forms of knowledge that in this very scientistic age tend to get deep, if you want, downplayed. And that's, again, if you want, another element of this sort of scientistic mentality that seems to have seized the universities. But I think it's important. There are two things. I mean, I want us to have a larger discussion, but there are two things in particular that I want to focus on, leading from this quote from Einstein, which I wish more scientists would heed, because he strikes to me exactly the right tone of the interrelatedness of problems, which again Pope Francis highlights as part of his sort of integral ecology, and that you sort of spell out in terms of the bringing together of economic thinking, ecological thinking, and then political thinking, and in your notion of equity, and which I would sort of broaden to perhaps sort of political thinking, where the nature of our economic life, that was in fact part of, if you were listening in, part of the discussion from David Griffin's session, where that whole problem, and I'll say something about that in my part of this hour that we share. But on this point, I think it's very important, taking our lead from Einstein, that the scientists and the environmental scientists see, thanks to your work and the work of here at people in the process studies, see the humanistic side of that. Because on the whole, again, looking at the research that is going on, these have tended to be two isolated communities. I mean, where the scientists have done their sort of more technical work, and where the humanists and social scientists have sort of tried to deal with the socio-political problems. But as you so wisely and so pertinently highlight, these are really an integrated problem. And I think it is high time that breach that has been created between these two communities be healed, and where the mutual interest of seeing ourselves as part of this wider problem of our common home, which we are responsible for, I think is the first point that I would emphasize. The second, very quickly, is, as you, in your original article where you talk about climate change inducing moral change, and again, invoking that quote from Einstein, and trying again to be specific so that we have something concrete to talk about. I would say that as a moral philosopher, certainly one area where moral change has to come about, which you as a Confucian scholar will appreciate, is this very atomistic, bounded idea of the moral self, which American individualism has so highlighted, and of course, which economic interests then seize on, the idea that we are isolated, bounded selves, and of course, that provides the opening to economic interests. Well, if this bounded self doesn't have its wants satisfied, well, then of course you have the glorious institution of the market that can provide it with all the. But you see, there's a pathology here that is very deep, because it's precisely this idea of the self that is isolated and separate from nature and other selves that is then continually trying, thanks to the market, and here again, the interrelationships are so crucial. If we can't sort of keep up with the latest competitive achievement which the market would highlight, the sense of inadequacy of the isolated self is then exploited by the market to say, well, in that case, what you need is this product, is this holiday, or etc. And the complicity in terms of moral pathology of the isolated self on the one hand, and the market as an institution that feeds that and promotes that isolated self, I think is an area that you as a Confucian scholar, I as a moral philosopher, I think, again, need to put our sort of focus on. And I leave it at that for the time being. But let me, by way of summary, I would say that, and in my talk, I'll talk about the struggle that is now going on. I mean, maybe I should just at least open the door to it. I mean, because of course we applaud Pope Francis for this ecology. But as you and I, as Catholics, both know, we've been talking about the glorious Methodists, but now we put Catholics on the rack here, because I mean, this is a colossal struggle within the Catholic Church. I mean, I think you and I identify as Vatican II Catholics, but as we know, that spirit of the Second Vatican Council has really been pretty repressed, let's be frank about it. And it's now, sort of 50 years later, that the more progressive forces within the Catholic Church are trying to carry out the tremendous potential of the Second Vatican Council, which unfortunately, again, let's be frank, has within the last two papacies been largely repressed. And so this struggle within the Church, which again on April 8th, when the Pope comes up with his letter on the family, which I'm sure will erupt again in great force, is something that, again, is part of this movement. I mean, now sort of looking at the Catholic side of that, where this struggle, which again, I mean, David mentioned the neocons, many of whom happen to be Catholic as well, and who have come up with their own criticisms of Pope Francis and his encyclical, the people from John Newhouse and what's the name of the fellow at the Washington, anyway, it'll come back. But anyway, the sort of neocon thinkers on the Catholic side who are sort of strongly opposed to the new thinking, if you want, that comes from the liberation perspective. And to me, as someone who identifies as a liberation philosopher and theologian, it's very gratifying to see that, you know, after again 40 years of squashing what was one of the most prominent movements in Christian theology, this Pope has allowed that to emerge again and given it a new grammar, if you want, but nonetheless taken its fundamental impulse of the liberation of the earth, the liberation of the poor, and the liberation of ourselves in that set of relationships as being, if you want, the chief mark of ecological conversion. So my thanks to you, and we can now sort of open it up to questions.
Yes, we invite now conversation to Mary Evelyn and Joseph. What are your thoughts or questions, comments?
Can I make just one comment while people are making their...
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Joseph, for that. And I wanted to add to our collective thinking that the opening with the science community, Peter Raven among them, is this, especially the climate change community. They have been so worn down by the fact in our country, not in other parts of the world, that in our country they have not been listened to, that in fact, before Gore's movie came out, An Inconvenient Truth, scientists from ANCAR, National Science Climate Research Institute in Boulder, were so deeply upset that their science wasn't reaching the public that some of them went into Jungian analysis. One of them became an analyst himself, and his new book called Facing Climate Change, which Columbia has just published, Jeffrey Teal is his name, Facing Climate Change, is about his story as a scientist, but also a human being deeply worried about the future of our planet. And my point in raising this is that the scientists realize, not necessarily on that level, but so many of them realize that the charts, the graphs, the way of communicating has not reached the public. And they also realize more and more that this is a moral issue, whether they call it a spiritual issue, it's an ethical issue, they're comfortable there. And so that's the opening that has not happened in 20 years to our community for coming in, hopefully with some humility, but also with sincere help on joining these forces of people and planet, of ecology and ethics in a new and fresh way. I think it's an unprecedented opening, and that's what I sense at Yale as well.
Is Thiel spelled Thiel?
Yes, Thiel.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, Aaron.
Mary Evelyn, as long as we're surveying the field of Christianity, Orthodox for one, Catholic, Methodist, there's another large section of Christianity, American Protestant conservative Christianity, sometimes called evangelical. What do you think the prospects are for making progress in that community? What are the problems that have to be overcome, and what are the prospects for making progress in that community?
Right. So I think this is a great point, and it just triggered something in Joseph's comments too about individualism and community. I want to reference another book that's just come out by Henry Rosemont called Against Individualism, and he's arguing from a Confucian point of view of the relationality, as Process thought would as well, of the importance of overcoming hyper-individualism. And I think that actually relates to evangelicals and all of these communities looking for community, looking for a basis of community. Modernity is a very hard thing for many people. This would be in our most compassionate framework to say that this is why people move back into so-called certainty and answers that make them feel comfortable. Now, the evangelical community is a spectrum of that, holding to very conservative answers, biblically based and so on, or even literally based, to, I would suggest, a spectrum that would actually meet this progressive Christian dialogue with tremendous authenticity and concern. So I think that community, we invited them in 1997, the Evangelical Environmental Network, to our conference at Harvard. John Cobb was there, a number others. It was a big conference, but what I'm trying to say is, in everything we do, to the extent we can, if we can bring together the spectrum within all of these world's religions, and that's what we tried to do at Harvard, so that there's a place at the table for different approaches to this problem, and the evangelical approach is going to be very different. But Catherine Hayhoe, the scientist from North Texas University, is looking all over. And so I would say that, yes, there's problems that we're not going to overcome, certain fundamentalist approach. Maybe we can have empathy as to why it's there. But I do think there's bridges to be built with evangelicals who are recognizing, just on the human level, their children and their grandchildren, what is the future? And for me, that is one of the most important bridge builders. Children, food, and health. Everybody has got to think about these issues. And as they deteriorate, how do we come together? And the ecumenical possibilities with this encyclical are extraordinary, but the interreligious ones are as well. I'm speaking at BC this week on the interreligious potential, post Laudato Si. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. And Joseph, if you would like to talk for a few minutes, do you have a presentation yourself, or?
Okay, all right, sure. But Mary Evelyn's going to be there, right? So
yes.
Yes, okay, all right, great, okay.
Leave time for her to respond to you. We've only got 20 more minutes.
Right, okay. So I'm not going to add much more to what has already been brought to this conversation, except perhaps one point. And just as I was remarking a minute ago about the scientists forming, if you want, their own community that's not been sufficiently in conversation with the humanists, I want to now focus on the social scientists. As some of you know, I'm a recovering economist, and I know something about the field of economics. I was taught by one of the rare economists to whom I owe a great deal, Amartya Sen, now at Harvard. But he is one of the very rare economists who has, thanks to having been brought up in India within the field of political economy, where the idea of economics was seen as essentially a moral science, and while it may have had its limitations as a moral science and not taking the earth and agriculture sufficiently seriously, nonetheless saw itself as a moral science, to the situation where economists today are increasingly seeing themselves as mathematical and natural scientists, and completely disavowing, if they want to make it a value-free science, and completely disavowing their role as moral scientists. And there's a great irony here, because, I mean, the person who is cited as, if you want, the legitimator of this movement is Adam Smith. And what people forget about Adam Smith is that Adam Smith was professor of moral philosophy at the University of Edinburgh, and that well before Adam Smith wrote his most famous book, The Wealth of Nations, he wrote an extremely important book which he himself regarded as the foundation of his economic work, namely The Theory of Moral Sentiments. Yeah. And if you forget that, and Adam Smith would have been the first to remind us that the market, as he saw it, could not really operate without certain social relationships being in place, of which the primary social relationship that Adam Smith focuses on in The Theory of Moral Sentiments is the idea of trust, and all that trust implies. So it's a long story, and because you're at Yale, and I occasionally teach at the University of Chicago, two centers of Nobel Prize winning economists, I would say that from the point of view of the university, that bears a large measure of blame. Thinking of it critically, but thinking of it more constructively, I think the push needs to be made for drawing economics, and of course there is again a trend with people like Joe Stiglitz and Jeffrey Sachs and others to sort of follow in the direction of seeing economics as an essentially sort of moral science rather than as a value-free or value-neutral science. But that's of course also had its impact on the on economic thinking. That we in David's session we and John were talking about economism, and there's no question that that is today seen from a political standpoint. And I think the last point that I would make is try to bring this discussion down, especially as we are in the midst of an election cycle here. That I think that this discussion that we are having has immediate relevance to what is going on, even as we talk, namely where in the campaigns, both on the Republican side and on the Democratic side, which are going to have enormous impact on not just on this election, but given the position, the geopolitical position of the United States on the world. I think it behooves us to sort of try to take these discussions into our political campaigns and try to address them in this window that we have between the November election and now our discussions here. So that's all I'll say by way of.
Thank you, and
Yeah.
please respond.
Well, thank you, Joseph. You're always provocative, and I loved your mention in your essay of Adam Smith. It's terribly important, and of course, John Cobb's path-breaking book with Herman Daly. We're all in debt to this ecological economics as opposed to environmental economics, which dominates the Yale School of Forestry, and I could tear my hair out. But I think I want to pick up on your point about social science going in the direction, again, as John and others have pointed out, in the very reductionist model, mathematizing everything and so on. And even our school has this joint program with the School of Management, which has grown rapidly under the deanship of a botanist, a paleobotanist, Peter Crane, who was head of Kew Botanical Gardens and the Field Museum at Chicago. And yet this has kind of gone runaway in the direction of market-based solutions, ecosystem services, and so on a market measurement. So, but here's what I would also suggest maybe an opening, again, against great odds, is environmental humanities. Now, some humanities has gone in a measurement direction, you might say, or even digitalizing framework. But I would suggest that some scientists and ecologists have said, okay, we need to have the human. And so Paul Ehrlich at Stanford created this Millennium assessment of human behavior. And he said, we've got to have the social sciences on board. And I said to him, a dozen years ago, Paul, we need to have the humanities on board. So many scientists are comfortable with the social scientists because they see them leaning in their direction. But I think it's incumbent upon us doing philosophy, doing religion, doing history, literature, art, music, and so on, to say, no, those who have been bearers of reflection on human behavior, human wisdom traditions, thought traditions, and so on, and historical perspective, et cetera, need more than ever to be at the table. Now, we've identified at Yale 66 courses in this area, which was amazing. We're trying to move this discussion forward. Our dean just asked for some slides that he would present to the Board of Trustees on this. UC Santa Barbara has something like 100 courses on it. UCLA is moving forward. Princeton just got a chair in environmental humanities. Virginia has got quite a few $1 million from the Mellon Foundation. Now, what I'm suggesting is this is a new opening so that philosophy and religion don't seem like a barnacle in this discussion, although barnacles are change agents, but can be part of a larger set of contributors. And so I think that's an opening. I just wanted to put that into the discussion here.
Thank you so much. This idea of bridging the disciplines and all the ways we need to be bridging and talking and working with other communities is so important. Yes?
What progress is being, we keep talking about people and planet and these things and our moral responsibility and the moral responsibility of individuals, yet not hyper-individualism. I recall when I was young, Moral Man and Immoral Society after World War II, where it was pointed out, as human beings, personal ethics don't work, don't have a limited impact when it comes to how we run our department, how we run our university, how we run our nonprofit organization, how we run our company. And I wonder how we run our movements. You talked a lot about where do you see the relevance of this, or where do you see progress in some sense of, I don't know the right word, developing some sense of a collective morality that would actually function in an Exxon, in a, that's my question.
What a fabulous question. And again, so many of you before me in this room have been working on this for a long, long time. I really want to make sure I hold up this book and I say that this is a huge contribution to it, Ignacio and John Cobb's wonderful collection here. But I think you are getting at a very, very important point. I could go at this in a number of ways, and it's not like I have a pathway forward. But a number of philosophers, of course, are looking at communitarian ethics, trying to recover that sensibility. Bruno Latour is trying to recover a sense of the Gaia thesis. Jürgen Habermas says we can't ignore the religious sensibilities here to create a sense of community for our planetary future. So people from various communities are realizing, I think, the limits of postmodernism, unless it's constructive in the Claremont School. They're realizing those limits. And I would suggest that the next generation, I've had young graduate students say, or I would say a little older than that we were mauled by postmodernism in graduate school. And it's not what we want. We are looking for something constructive and communal, communitarian. They want to keep the pluralism. But I think the next generation, to me, is a great source of hope in this regard. Again, not all, but those who are seeking deep deep ways forward that have traction are definitely looking for our common home. And that even we can put that back into our vocabulary. It has been so long in the background, except for process thinking or Teilhardian thinking. It has been completely ignored. It can be reclaimed. This is not a meta-narrative. It is not homogenizing differences. We finally have words, a document, and a grounding to bring to bear the work that's been going on for 40, 50 years at Claremont on these issues. And students are hungry for a sense of where they belong and how they can contribute. So that's where I get my hope. These students are wonderful.
I would just add to that, as we are in a school of theology, that again, this is a very, very broad topic, but this idea of community is linked, I think, also with a theological shift, which I'll just sketch out very broadly. In other words, a theology of immanence rather than transcendence falsely understood. I mean, these are dialectical ideas, so that I don't want to sort of flatten immanence to a kind of secularism, but nonetheless, I think that we owe a lot to the feminists, to ecologists and others who have taken us away theologically. I mean, we mentioned this again in Burns' question and others, of the idea of certain evangelical and highly conservative Christians who think of transcendence as in otherworldly terms. I think, again, if there's been part of this movement, which, again, the Pope, I think, is moving towards, though there are tensions, again, that Catherine Keller and others have pointed out in his theology, and which I myself critique very briefly in my piece. But that move towards an embrace of a theology of immanence, I think, is one that, and again, Mary Evelyn, you and I, who come from sort of Confucian, or at least have worked in Confucian and in Indian thinking, which is so much stronger there. I mean, with metaphors in Indian thought of Mother Earth that have been, part of the Upanishads and the Vedas for 5,000 years. That thinking, I think, is one that, again, needs to be brought into prominence. That they get a new vibrancy, if you want, if these metaphors of Mother Earth now have a set of ecological and economic relationships that, in our own time, give it an urgency that is not just archaic, but something that is very vital in the present.
I think that's tremendously important. Yeah, go ahead. If someone else wants to.
Thank you, Mary Evelyn, for putting this whole discussion in the context of a real movement that's emerging, especially from my point of view, interest in the interfaith aspects of that and how that has developed. I wondered if you could say just a little bit more about the response of the non-Christian community of readers to the papal encyclical here, and if there's some hopeful signs there that this is awakening a larger spiritual discussion globally in that sense. And then if you would care to comment on if you see some directions coming out of this for the future of the interfaith movement.
Well, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about on Thursday at Boston College. So I welcome your points. I would say, and by the way, I happened to look at the wiki article on the encyclical by chance. I was looking for something else, but there's a paragraph there which cites some of the key names in the interreligious world who have responded to it. We also have on our website statements from the different world religions responding to the encyclical, responding to climate change, and so on, and also just general statements on the environment from all the world's religions, which have grown exponentially over the last 20 years. So as you probably know, over 400 rabbis responded to the encyclical, led by Arthur Waskow and others of the progressive Jewish movement. And he's been, a huge supporter of it. And we want to, of course, acknowledge what Catherine might say, what Rosemary might say, the views of women, birth control, and so on and so forth, are far from where we would like to see them. But the Jewish community acknowledging that gave a very strong endorsement. The Islamic community did as well in a statement that was issued from Istanbul. And you can read that. Many, I'm not sure how many, but I think at least 200 people have signed that, and maybe more by now. There's a Hindu statement, the Bhumi community out of Oxford, and so on. So, and I think it's more than jumping on a bandwagon. It's moving forward just in the spirit that Joseph has mentioned of bringing an appreciation and an addition to what it is that their tradition can bring to bear. And I just so much endorse Joseph's point about immanence. It's one of my great attractions to the Asian religions, which has a profound sense of the immanence. It's an attraction to Teilhard de Chardin. This is a divine milieu. How can we destroy a sacred universe? And as we bring that forward more and more from a plurality of the world's religions, I think this is an unstoppable force, absolutely unstoppable. There's always going to be the naysayers, the conservatives, politically and religiously, but we have some large door that has opened, and if we can graciously but forcefully go through it with the other world religions. I mean, I think of the Cobb-Abe dialogue as so ahead of the game, and I mentioned that Boston College. So that, just to conclude from your very important question, we were involved in Confucian Christian dialogue and so on, but now what we need, and certainly the Buddhist Christian dialogue led the way on this, it's not just how do we see different senses of the sacred, meditation, the divine, etc. How do we see the path forward for caring for our common home? This is what interreligious dialogue simply has to be about. It's no longer just tolerance and understanding. We've made great grounds to build forward towards collaboration in a movement for our common home.
Thank you so much. We have one last question for Dr. Cobb.
Actually, not so much a question, just saying, I hope you all understand that much of the progress that has been made on this topic over the decades has been due to the woman we're speaking with.
You're here.
She is not just an observer.
I tear up a little bit when John says something like that. And I just want to acknowledge his support for our work over the years. Christmas card letter, a line just saying, keep your work going. We so appreciate your work. I cannot begin to tell you how much that has meant. And I'm so happy to be in touch with you like this, even at a distance, because I feel our worlds, our thinking, our commitments are deeply, not only entangled, but profoundly interwoven in a web of life into the future. So I thank all of you. I thank Joseph and Ignacio and John for your book. But what a great occasion to be with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Adios.
Adios.
We next are going to have a section with Barbara.
I think we have a
No,
break.
but break first.
11:30.
I need
We
a
have a
break.
break. Oh, we have a half an hour break. That's wonderful.
All right.
Wonderful break for half an hour. We'll meet back here.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
11:30.
Yeah, great. Thank you, John.